Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the miracle stories that are happening right here in our own city, in our own state, every day. My name is Tony Kausha, and the title of our show is Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. Please note, this show is not about religion, and we're not trying to change anyone's religion, and we're not trying to get you to join any religion. It's just about miracle stories. I don't know of any religion on the planet that doesn't talk about miracles. That's why religions begin, because they have something that's telling them there's really a God. But we're not going to get into that. We're going to just talk about miracles and leave the decisions about all that up to you. So we don't care what religion you are. We just want to talk about miracles. If you are an atheist, I think you'll enjoy the program as well, although I can't guarantee you'll remain an atheist very long after you hear many convincing stories, coincidence kinds of stories about miracles. You can email me your own stories if you wish. We'll try to use all we can on the show. I can't guarantee we will, depending on volume and time, but you're welcome to send your stories on to us, and we will mention them when we can. You can send them to the following email address. But please notice that if we do use your story, we won't mention your name. We'll keep you anonymous. And we suggest that in your story, when you send it to us, don't use your correct name. That way anyone listening will not be able to figure out that it was you that sent the story in. The email address you can send your stories to is very easy to remember. It consists of 2 words and 3 numbers. The first word is Tony, spelled Tony, and the second word is and, spelled A-N-D, and the numbers are 777. So once again, the name is Tony and 777 at AOL.com. Well, let us begin. Our first miracle story this week is from a 22-year-old college student. She tells us a story about her dad and her mom. Her dad and mom were married, and they had 4 children. Apparently they were married for something like 12 years, 10 or 12 years. And in the 4 years preceding that, so from 4 years prior to the 12 years, the dad had become seriously addicted to drugs and alcohol, and it was a daily addiction. His job was suffering, and he was malfunctioning. The person telling us the story was not born yet, but they heard the family sharing this story for many years, and they're 22 years. So this is a story that's 22 years old, but certainly a miracle story. He's in that 4-year period where he was addicted. There were times where he would not show up for a few days. There were times where he actually, in anger, took off and abandoned the whole family, and there was a mother and 4 children. They'd be abandoned. They didn't know where he was and if he was coming back or whatever. And he'd be gone for days. And he kept falling back into it. He'd come back home, he'd try, and he'd quickly fall back into the addiction. The mother prayed for this 4 years. She was steadily praying because he was a wonderful man when she married him. The drugs and the alcohol had spoiled him, and he was a wonderful man when he was off the drugs and alcohol. So she was trying to salvage the marriage, and she was hanging on for 4 years, but it was really a brutal, very brutal period for her. Being abandoned, not knowing when he's coming back, if he's coming back, several times during the 4-year period. And she was at her wits' end, and she was praying very hard during this period of this miraculous story. And he came back home. I guess he'd been away for just a couple of days, but he came back home after one of his events of leaving, and he found out that his wife was now pregnant with their 5th child now. And it so impacted him and stunned him. Certainly he had been struggling for 4 years and trying to get off the drugs and the alcohol, but not successful. So this now 5th child on the way, and how loving his wife had been, it really affected him. So he went off to pray. I guess he went off to pray for a day or so, because he came back a changed person. He had talked to some of his friends, some Christian friends that helped him and gave him some great advice. And so he came back home and he promised his wife that he was a changed man. He was swearing off everything right now, cold turkey, absolutely cold turkey, and no program, no piecemeal process, just totally, absolutely stopping right now. And that's what he did. And he did quit cold turkey. And he asked his wife if he could pick the name for her current pregnancy, because he wanted to pick a meaningful name that would always be a reminder to him of his promise to God and to her that he was going to, change his life on this particular day from now on. And the wife agreed, and he picked a very biblical name, and I can't tell it to you because we try to keep everybody anonymous. But it's definitely, if you read the Bible, you would notice this name for sure. And for 22 years now, this college student has been a constant reminder to her dad, and they have a close relationship. She thinks the world of him. He has never fallen back. He's been the most wonderful dad she can imagine, and that's why she was sharing this story with us. And as I say, and as she shared, 22 years now, he's been off drugs, etc. And the fact that her name even reminds her of this wonderful story that the family had related to. So even her birth was a miraculous thing. So this is a great story of how prayer works. The mother was for years praying and hoping, and she didn't give up. She got to the point where she might give up, but God blessed her to pray one more sincere prayer, I guess. And it did affect her husband. And he wound up meeting some proper people that, helped him to straighten up. And he's been fantastic now for 22 years. So this is a great miraculous story, certainly indicating prayer works and that God intervened. And now we have a wonderful 22-year-old college person who, as part of their story of their life and their name, has this great story to share with people. Our next coincidence miracle is from a listener who tells us something that happened during the 9/11 Twin Towers disaster. She worked for a paving company, and they had some contracts with homeowners to install new driveways, new tar driveways. She got a call from a man who wanted to get his driveway tarred. She had 2 dates to pick from. She offered the man the dates to choose from. He said, doesn't matter to him. You go ahead, pick whatever date fits you. So she picked the date 9/11, and he stayed home from work that day to supervise the job being done in his driveway. And as we all know, 9/11 was a disastrous Twin Tower disaster in New York City. And he worked in the building, and if he was not getting his driveway tarred on that particular day, he would have been in the Twin Towers. So she feels extremely blessed, and certainly does he as well. And he thanked her profusely for being inspired by God to pick the right date. And both of them remember the date every year, and the fact that she was involved. God allowed her to be involved as part of this story, and she picked, and she indicated that she had prayed for a quick inspiration of what day to pick. So we attribute all of this to God inspiring her to pick the right date. So this man was not at the Twin Towers when the Twin Towers went down in New York City. Our next miracle story is about a woman who was out driving during a hurricane late at night, and apparently she came upon a tree that had fallen across the road, a tree or several trees, and she couldn't stop in time. The roads were very slick. She saw a branch headed toward the front window on the dashboard. She doesn't remember a lot after that. She apparently was unconscious for a while. When she awakened, she did remember seeing the branch coming toward her head. So she was a bit dazed, and she got out of the car somehow And she got to safety. She began walking on the road, and somebody came by and picked her up and took her to the hospital. And when they called the police and reported everything, they were told that the police were so certain that it was impossible that anybody survived that crashed. When they got there, the way the branches had broken through the front window, they couldn't believe anybody survived it by what they had seen there. But since there was nobody there, they thought someone must be definitely injured, and they were searching the forest that was in that area, and they had searched the forest for several hours looking for the passenger. And so she relates to us that based on the police report, it was highly unlikely that anybody survived this particular crash, and she certainly believes from their report, and they also believe it certainly sounds like a miracle to everybody involved. Our next coincidence miracle has to do with a woman who wrote to us about how her grandfather had always collected a thing he called lucky pennies. Actually, he called them lucky-miraculous pennies. And over the course of his life, and I guess he was about 70 years old when this story was being related to us, but over the period of his life, for many years, he had found something like 30 pennies in his life. And when he found them, they were heads up. Instead of being tails up, they were heads up, and that's why he would call them lucky-miraculous pennies. And so the family used to joke about it, and he kept them in a plastic bag, and he would show his grandchildren and anybody else who wanted to hear about his stories. And some of them were fascinating stories about where and how he found them. But on the day of the funeral, the young lady writing to us about her grandfather, she said that on the day of the funeral, when she was walking in through the main entrance, before she got to the main front door, she spotted a lucky miraculous penny heads up on the concrete pathway, dead center on the pathway, like somebody placed it right in the center. And it was a penny being heads up, a very beautiful, nice, shiny penny, by the way, on the day of his funeral. And so certainly this is a coincidence miracle in all of the steps that she explained to us. Our next coincidence miracle is about, from one of our listeners, a man who had a meeting to attend, a very large meeting, was about an hour away from home, and he drove for an hour on the highway, and just as he got off on the final exit for him to get off for this meeting, he noticed he was following a car with a license plate number, the letter G for God, G for God again, number 7. So it was 2 G's and a number 7. And G is the 7th letter of the alphabet, so he saw the GG7 as a number being number 777, which is God's holy number. When he got to the event, he found there were 2 parking lots to be parked in. He had to decide which one to go for, which one to go try to find a parking space. He was running a little bit late, so he prayed for wisdom on which parking lot. And since he had just seen 3 sevens on the after he got off the highway, he trusted God that God would inspire him. So he was inspired which lot to go to. He said there was like 100 cars parked in this lot that he picked. So he asked God to inspire him which row he should drive down looking for a parking place. And he went down the row he was inspired to. And when he pulled into the only parking spot he could find on that row, it turned out that the cars parked in front of him, one had a license plate number 555 on the left side, and the car on the right side had a license plate number 777. As you all know, the numbers 555 and 777 both are numbers that indicate the holy presence of God. God bless you all. I'll talk to you next week.